doesn't know about the disgraced former cryptocurrency executive Sam Bankman-Fried? The guy was indicted on 8 criminal charges, including wire fraud and conspiracy by misusing customer funds. But guess what? He was granted release from federal custody in a Manhattan court with extremely stringent bail requirements, including a $250 million bond secured by his parents' interest in their California home and a requirement that he remain in home detention with them. At the hearing, Mr. Bankman-Fried did not admit or deny guilt. He has previously distanced himself from the charges, which have shaken the entire crypto industry. It was the most recent twist in a rapidly developing story that in recent weeks transformed one of the most well-known paper billionaires in the cryptocurrency world into its most prominent villain. The 30-year-old Bankman-Fried made an appearance in federal court barely hours after being returned from the Bahamas, where he had been detained on December 12th in a posh apartment complex. The exchange that Bankman established, FTX, was headquartered in the region. Mr. Bankman-Fried, who stepped down as chief executive the same day, has previously denied deliberate wrongdoing and said he is focused on restoring funds to customers. At the arraignment, Mr. Bankman-Fried spoke only once when asked if he understood the conditions of his release and that he could be charged with an additional crime if he fails to show up to court. "Yes, I do," he replied. Additionally, his release came after a statement by Damian Williams, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, that 2 former executives of Bankman's companies, Fried's Caroline Ellison and Gary Wang, had admitted guilt to charges of federal fraud and were working with investigators. The allegations against the CEOs will probably make Bankman-Fried's case even more challenging. The pace of the criminal probe against FTX and its affiliated companies has been astonishing. In less than 2 months, FTX transformed from a prosperous exchange to a bankrupt organization whose officials are being prosecuted for some of the most serious offenses in the financial industry. According to the prosecution, Bankman's wrongs caused his exchange to collapse and billions of dollars in consumer damages. But this was not always the case. A few months ago, supporters of cryptocurrencies lauded Bankman as the industry's rescuer and spokesperson, ready to save other businesses and attest to the legitimacy of cryptocurrencies to legislators and authorities. However, with his riches gone and the charges piling up, Bankman is now in for what is probably going to be a huge judicial battle with a few favorable outcomes. Judge Gabriel W. Gorenstein issued a warning to Bankman, informing him that failure to appear in court or a violation of any other bail requirements would result in the issuance of a warrant for his arrest, and that he and his parents would be liable for the high amount. The parents' home in the Bay Area would serve as security for the $250 million personal recognizance bond, which is a written guarantee to appear in court as necessary. Bankman-Fried had to give up his passport and get a mental health assessment and therapy. But the government or the court must first approve any costs that are greater than $1,000. For now, Bankman-Fried will reside with his parents, Stanford Law School professors Joe Bankman and Barbara Fried, as part of the bail agreement. He will be subject to stringent electronic surveillance, which will include a bracelet that was supposed to be worn by him when he left the courthouse. Discussions about a bail deal had begun even before Bankman was extradited. In court, Nicholas Ruse, an assistant U.S. attorney, described the proposed package that had been worked out with the defense lawyers. He also pointed out that Bankman had consented to extradition. Had he resisted the process, leading to a drawn-out legal fight, it was a near certainty the government would have opposed any pretrial release. Federal marshals led Bankman into court. He was seated between his attorneys, Mark Cohen and Christian Everdell, and was dressed in a dark suit with his ankles bound. He sat with his shoulders slumped and his head cocked downward. Cohen contended that Bankman had consented to travel to New York to face the accusations and was therefore not a flight risk. 2 counts of wire fraud and 6 counts of conspiracy to commit money laundering, campaign finance law violations, and fraud involving securities and commodities have been brought against Bankman-Fried. The U.S. Attorney last week referred to FTX as one of the largest financial frauds in American history. If Bankman-Fried were found guilty of the charges against him, he might get a term that is equivalent to lifetime in prison. When Madoff's Ponzi scheme unraveled after customers tried to retrieve their funds during the 2008 financial crisis, thousands of victims lost their savings, although much of the money was clawed back. Madoff was serving a 150-year sentence when he died last year in federal prison. The case against Bankman-Fried is reminiscent of another financial disaster from more than 10 years ago, the demise of MF Global. a commodities brokerage company which was exposed for misusing client cash to support its operations. Consumer losses exceeded $1 billion. Bankman-Fried is accused of using Alameda Research, a cryptocurrency hedge fund that he had also started and owned, to transfer billions of dollars in FTX customer deposits. He is accused of using customer funds to pay extravagant real estate purchases, investments in other businesses, political donations, and a celebrity-driven marketing campaign, according to regulators and prosecutors. In addition to collaborating witnesses, encrypted text conversations, and tens of thousands of pages of bank data, Bankman-Fried had reportedly committed crimes of epic dimensions. Since the 1980s, both the father and mother of Bankman-Fried have taught at Stanford Law School. Bankman-Fried and his younger brother Gabe were raised on the Stanford campus in a home close to a cooperative run by undergraduates where they frequently had rowdy parties. His parents enthusiastically supported Bankman-Fried when he launched FTX. During his 11 months as an employee, Bankman concentrated on the business's charity activity, but Bankman-Fried is not actually being freed for $250 million thanks to Bankman and Mrs. Fried. It is only if their son ran away that they would theoretically be responsible for that sum and their home might be taken. The legal risk facing Bankman-Fried is increasing every day. The two former executives, Wang and Miss Ellison, reached plea agreements which appear to greatly improve their prosecution's case. Both were members of his close-knit group in the Bahamas and shared a lavish condo with Bankman-Fried and 7 other people. Ellison and Bankman-Fried had occasionally dated as well. Ellison, who is 28 years old, took over as Alameda's CEO when Bankman-Fried launched FTX. Before becoming the exchange's chief technical officer, Wang, 29, assisted Bankman-Fried in founding Alameda and FTX. According to Williams, the U.S. attorney, the accusations against the two were in connection with their roles in the frauds that led to FTX's failure. Former Manhattan Assistant District Attorney and current professor Rebecca Roif remarked that the collaboration accords make it substantially tougher for Bankman-Fried to maintain that he didn't know what was going on at FTX. Additionally, Wang and Miss Ellison consented to resolve civil lawsuits filed by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission and the Securities and Exchange Commission. Bankman-Fried is the target of investigations by both agencies. One of the more thorough explanations of the alleged fraud at FTX is provided in the SEC complaint against Ellison and Wang, which asserts that the two cooperators were deeply involved in a conspiracy that dates back to the company's creation in 2019. According to the complaint, Bankman-Fried gave Wang and other FTX engineers instructions to build software code that essentially let Alameda borrow a limitless sum of money from FTX. To manipulate the price of FTT, a cryptocurrency that FTX invented and that Alameda used as collateral to borrow money, Bankman-Fried allegedly collaborated closely with Ellison. According to the complaint, Bankman-Fried started to worry about the psychological impact of the price of FTT going below a particular threshold. He then gave Ellison the order to have Alameda buy FTT to support the price, which he repeated 2 years later in 2021. Gary Gensler, the chair of the SEC, said in an interview on Thursday that exchange-created crypto tokens like FTT resemble the sparsely traded, dubious value microcap stocks that insiders control and manage.